In every game, there is something that is always considered terrible, whether it is or it isn't. Maybe it's a certain car in a racing game, a certain gun in a first-person shooter, or a playable group of people. And in Hell Let Loose, you kind of have this with the British. Now, in a game like Hell Let Loose, it is very asymmetrical. Now, what do I mean by this? Asymmetrical in a game like Hell Let Loose is that there are factions or aspects of the game that have certain weapons that are different from the other ones that may or may not be quote-unquote balanced. For example, the Americans have all semi and fully automatic weapons for every class minus the sniper, meaning that in close quarters combat and just all forms of combat, the American soldier has a better chance of winning because they don't have a bolt action rifle as their main battle rifle compared to the Germans. However, the Germans have the better rocket launcher in the Panzerschreck. The Gewehr 43 is not bad, and the SUG-44 is a decent assault rifle. The MG42 is also a really good, if not the best machine gun in the entire game. The Russians, to their credit, have a lot of good weapons in the PPSH, the SVT-40, the DP-27's okay. The only major issue with the Russian ground forces was the AT rifle, but that's rectified with the level 8 Lend-Lease AT class with the rocket launcher. But at least the Russians had a decent chance when they first came out, with a couple tweaks that needed to be made. But when the British first came out, yes, they were terrible. But the problem, I think, with that is that after 2024 or late 2023 into 2024, Team 17 dropped a massive update, essentially overhauling the faction, but it still seems like a lot of hatred still is there for the British. And I'm not saying some of this isn't justified, but it definitely feels like it's a little overblown. I think that's what this video is going to tackle. And I wanted to do this video when Tobruk came out, but obviously just things didn't work out, my schedule didn't work out, but I'm tackling this video for a multitude of reasons. Because one, Tobruk just came out, it's a British themed video. Also, I think because the stigma of, oh, their weapons are bad or all this, I think is a little overblown. And also, I think they have some hidden gems that I don't think anyone wants to give them credit for. So I want to dive into that with just the whole saying that the British faction is not as bad as people think. Now, what we're going to do here, though, is we're going to address this in a couple different ways. The maps, the weapons, the tanks, and is there anything actually wrong with any of these categories and just anything like that. So we're going to try to do a top-to-bottom evaluation of the British faction and show if they are good or bad still in a certain degree, and is the hate justified. Starting off with their small arms, the main battle rifle for the British in terms of their actual rifle is the SMLE No. 1 Mark III and the Lee Enfield No. 1 Mark IV. Essentially the World War I, World War II version of the rifle with a 10-round magazine capacity. So since the last update that made the British faction better was that it took away the P14 version, which was a 5-round capacity rifle from World War I. I'll be honest here, I didn't even know it existed until it was in this game. But they've since taken it out and replaced it with this rifle you see on screen. And besides the sights maybe being a little iffy, the handling is alright, and it overall is a serviceable rifle. In terms of damage, it is a little hard to prove what the damage is in terms of it. I do have a video on my channel that explains a little bit about what the damage is. Go take a look at that. But for both of the rifles, they're not terrible in terms of what they do. They are on par with everything, and they have a higher round capacity. At least one of the gripes I heard with these guns was, at least in my inner circle that is, was that the sights were not as good. They were kind of and I thought they're okay. I thought I just chalked up to more of a skill issue, but that's my take on these rifles. They're serviceable. They have 10-round capacities. Against Kar 98s, they do their job, which is what you can only really ask of a rifle to do. And against Kar 98, I will say the Kar 98 does feel a little smoother, but I think that's personal preference, not actual facts. And yeah, the sights are very nice on a Kar 98. And at the same time, it really just comes down to who's the better shooter at that point, which is not the gun's fault. That's more of a, okay, that's skill, not the gun's bad. Moving on to the submachine guns, we have the Sten 5, or the different model of the Sten itself, and the M1928 version of the Thompson. Now, overall, the SMGs are once again not that bad. They're decent. They do their job as well. And the only thing I have a gripe with is a personal issue of the vibration of my controller not working for half the guns. But that's a nitpick. Now, what I thought I could do to at least show off these guns was a recoil test. So what you have here is the American Thompson. I'm not holding the stick, I'm just letting it fire and shoot upwards, and that's where it's at. Now, from here, I decided to test the British submachine guns that I had available to me as best as I could. The main test I did here was recoil. So what I have here is the Allies 8th Army Thompson versus the just regular British faction Thompson. And as you see, the recoil pattern is about the same, and the hit spread is, well, about the same, even with one that has a grip and the other one doesn't. The spread itself, when I'm actually trying to control it, is not as bad either. Now we have the MP40 versus the Allies Thompson. And overall, besides which direction the recoil goes, it's about the same. So it stacks up against the MP40 just fine. Now, with the Thompson with the drum mag, it is the same sort of recoil, minus the fact that you have 50 bullets instead of, about 30. The Sten 5, the Sten for the main British Allies faction, is essentially about the same amount of recoil as both the MP40 and the other Thompsons. The only submachine gun that has higher recoil is the regular Sten that you see with the British 8th Army faction, or sub-faction I should say, and the British Allies faction tank commander loadout, where it just has a regular Sten, and the recoil is a little higher, so there's that. Next we have the fully automatic rifles, or probably just for the sake of simplicity, assault rifles, essentially. I know it's not an assault rifle, I'm just using that term for the sake of keeping it simple. And we have the Bren gun. And the Bren gun, although very unconventional in how it looks, is functional at its best, because essentially for the British main faction, the Allies faction, you have essentially two classes you could run this with. And that is the auto rifle and the machine gunners, second class. So you have two Bren guns. Well, for the Germans, you have two STG-44s, one for your assault and one for your automatic rifleman. And overall, from using this gun in the training range, its recoil is actually very good, and you have a bipod, which will be getting further updates come later this year in 2025. Now here's a side-by-side comparison of the STG-44 and the Bren. Now, I know that this looked sus as all hell, but hear me out on this one. So the thing with the Bren that you can go and test yourself. You can go to the training range and not hold your stick or mouse and just let the recoil fire up. And I guarantee you'll get the same thing. I even went back and double tested it to make sure that this wasn't just a fluke, and it wasn't. Now, the main issue with the Bren that I could truly understand is that when you aim down the sights and fire the weapon, that it is a bit harder to see your target, as you see on screen now. And this can be a bit of an issue, because obviously you need to be able to see to hit your target, but at the same time, it's the whole thing of you aim first, then you shoot. But this weapon is still really good because of its low recoil, its bipod, and just is the ability to just be a decent running gun style of weapon. But that's the Bren gun, at least in my field, and I think it does its job decent enough. Now, if there is one place that the UK factions are still kind of mediocre, it is in their LMGs, being the Lewis gun is very much more comparable to the DP27 rather than the MG34s and 42s that it would be competing against. And the thing is, though, with the Lewis guns, it's not necessarily a bad gun. The main issue I think you have is its rate of fire, but its hip fire ability is actually fairly accurate. You can see where the rounds are going, and it's actually not too badly off. Now, the recoil is going to be a bit much, because again, it's an LMG. It's not meant to be held and aimed like you're running and gunning like it's Call of Duty, but you can at least essentially run and gun a little bit at close range with this weapon. Now, since I really can't test the recoils with how it was because the bullets just go everywhere, I'm just going to do the rate of fire test here for the LMGs. I mean, with the MG34, the rate of fire is just a lot more. The ammunition count's a little higher, and I can just keep firing. Now, obviously, you don't want to run and gun with machine guns, but it's one of those things in a pinch if you need to, say, maybe you're getting overrun on a flank and need to hope that you get them. I would trust myself more with an MG34 or an MG42, rather than a Lewis gun. But the Lewis gun, though, I will say at closer ranges is going to be more accurate because of the lower rate of fire. But that still doesn't get into the whole thing with the MG42 on maps like El Alamein and Tobruk with the longer sight lines in the outer areas of the map of Tobruk and just El Alamein in general. Driel is similar with this. The MG42 is perfect for longer range machine gun usage for shooting at targets and also just suppressing targets. But I digress. The other big weakness I would say the British small arms has is the lack of a semi-automatic rifle. And this does make a decent bit of difference, as the Germans do have a handful of classes with the Gewehr 43, particularly the Officer, Commander, Rifleman Level 6 class, and the Assault. But the British don't have anything. They have Lee Enfields with 10-round capacities, which does arguably trump over the Kar 98's 5-round capacity. The Sten and MP40s and the M1928 Thompsons are about the same, as I've already shown. The Bren is in some ways better than the SUG-44, in other ways not. But if there's one thing that's undeniable, it's that the Gewehr 43 still has the British beat. So they could maybe benefit like 1 or 2 M1 Garands, but do I think it's a game breaker? Not necessarily, but that's that. Now, maybe wondering if there's anything else here. There are pistols, and I guess maybe the Germans have a slight advantage over this because they have actual pistols instead of revolvers, as they do have the Walther P38 and the Luger, which are 8-round capacity magazines for the pistols, while the British have a revolver with 6 rounds that is very slow loading. So I guess if there's a disadvantage there, that's fine, but the pistols are very weak compared to any other weapon in the game. So this isn't a massive difference, but it is slight, so I do want to mention it here. Now we're going to look at AT weapons, in particular the rocket launchers for all the factions, starting with the American one, the M9 bazooka for the Americans and the Russians. And the thing is with the American rocket launchers, it kind of sucks in comparison with the other ones. Here you're going to see it bounce off the front of a Panzer IV both times. I even aim for the machine gun, and I also aim for the right corner from the screen there. And I bounced off both times, no damage. You're also going to see me bounce off the side of a Panther tank both times, making that not really too good. Now we go to the Panzerschreck, and you're going to see it pierce right through the front of the Sherman both times and destroy it. And also, now we swap over to it, pierce the Sherman Heavy 76 twice from the side. One more shot would have killed this tank. And that's that. Now, let's get to the British rocket launcher, the PIAT. And not only does it do the same things as the Panzerschreck, it reloads slightly faster. So that's the big thing with this rocket launcher. It's arguably better than the Panzerschreck. It does the same damage with penetration, and it reloads slightly faster, meaning you can do a follow-up shot a lot quicker than you could in a Panzerschreck, which I'll now show side by side now. So you get into a difference here of how long it takes between on the heavy tanks. And I know the British have the AT rifle. I'm not going to harp on it. It's basically the same as the Russian AT rifle. Can't pierce the front or sides of mediums and heavies. Can only pierce the backs of them. And it can only pierce the side and back of light tanks. And then it can pierce recon tanks wherever. But there's that. But in terms of the infantry weapons that the British have, I don't think they're as bad as people think they are. Now, yes, they used to be pretty bad back when they had the Lanchester and everything like I mentioned before. But I think nowadays they have decent guns. You just need a little bit of practice with them, with any weapon, because this game is different than a lot of other shooter-type games. So there's that. Their AT weapons are good. They also do have the Gannon bomb, which I didn't touch on, which is good for taking out trucks and garrisons if you're running the Satchel class. So there's that. There's little nuances that I think are enough to make this faction competitive against the Germans, especially since there is 2 of the 3 maps being El Alamein and Tobruk being the British 8th Army, so you don't have to deal with like SUG-44s or Gewehrs at all. Now, let's touch on armor now, because I think this is a big one as well, because when the British came out, their armor was trash. The only heavy tank they had was the Firefly, and at the time I really didn't consider it a heavy tank, because it was a medium tank with a heavy tank gun. But after doing some more deep diving, and now that the Churchill has been introduced, we can finally give them a fair armor assessment, and honestly, they actually go toe-to-toe with the Germans. So I won't touch on all the classes. The main ones I want to touch on are the heavy tanks. But if you want to know more about the other vehicles, go down to another video basically detailing every tank in the game and vehicle in the game. That way, if you want to know a little bit about them and maybe understand some of the tank balancing. But I digress. Now, with this footage here, you're going to see is we're in a Churchill 3 on the British 8th Army faction in Tobruk. And the thing you want to understand with heavy tanks is they can one-tap mediums if it's a hull shot, which that's for any heavy tank versus a medium. They can just simply one-shot them if it's a direct hull shot. And the thing with this is that the big problem that the British had against the Germans was especially on Driel, was that the Panther and Tiger would outclass the Firefly because the Panther was faster. It had, at the time, I think, a faster reload, and the fact that the Germans could field 2 heavy tanks rather than the British's only 1. And this was the case on El Alamein before they changed all the tanks. This is back when the Cromwell was the medium tank for the British 8th Army. But now the British with the Churchill have more tanks to work with, and arguably in some ways better than the German ones. So with the Churchill 3 here that you have here, armed with the 57mm cannon, it can go toe-to-toe with Tigers. Yes, I know realistically that may not be the case, but in the game's balancing, they have it to where the 57 can pierce the front. Now, I don't have access to the 8th Army Churchill, but we do have access to the British Ally faction Churchill with the 75, which the things still apply the same way. And what I'm going to do against this Panther is I'm going to kill it in 2 shots. Even though in reality, I don't believe this 75mm would actually be able to pierce the front of a Panther just out in the open, maybe not even hit the machine gun port. But anyone can tell me better on that one. My main thing I want to touch on that really sets the British heavies apart from the other heavies of all the other factions is one particular one in general, and that is the Firefly. Now, the main thing with the Firefly is both its firepower and its mobility, or at least its speed anyway. In terms of speed, it can keep up with the Panther at about 20-21 kilometers per hour, which is about the same as the Panther. The only difference here in terms of mobility is that the turning radius for the Firefly is not that good, where the Panther could turn more on a dime. So if there's one advantage, there's that. Also, the driver for the Firefly does not have access to a machine gun, while the Panther does. Now, you may be thinking, okay, how does this make the Panther worse than the Firefly? Well, the Firefly's main cannon has a 7-second reload, which means it trumps the Panther and the Tiger's 9-second reload, which 2 seconds can make a lot of difference. And as you see here, the reload actually goes pretty quickly. But just so you guys, believe me and stuff like that, let's do a side-by-side comparison of the Panther and the Firefly of when they're loaded. Now, keep in mind, I did not 100% line them up. I did that somewhat on purpose to show that even though the Panther might reload first, the Firefly is going to reload faster. And the Tiger has the same reload as the Panther, so they're going to outdo both tanks, essentially. So there's that side-by-side comparison. Now, the only other real thing that is different with the British compared to the Germans is that both their light tanks have cannons compared to the Germans that have the Lux, that has the auto cannon, that really can't do much against anything besides infantry. So besides some caveats with the machine gun ports or maybe some slight mobility aspects, I would say that the British armor can stack well up against the Germans enough in a balanced sense. If there had to be some way the British were still truly weak, it was in the maps. Now, I will admit, everyone's going to have a different opinion on the maps. This is simply just my opinion, and at least from who I have talked to with both in the competitive community that I help run and just with people I've talked to in my own clan. So just, again, everyone could have a different opinion here. This is just my take. With the maps the British are on, it's kind of mixed to the degree of, okay, they're all either mid or kind of terrible. Now, Tobruk, I think, is probably the best of the 3. You have a little bit of everything. You got some open ground to the north. You have some urban combat in the south and center of the maps. I think there's a little bit of everything for everyone. I think it's probably the best of the 3. Driel is probably the next second, which is kind of a mid map. I can understand it's another bridge map, but you can cross anywhere. It's just very wide open, and it makes for MG42 guys basically having a good day at the office. But the British faction has its tanks, it has everything that you could need, and it still could be a way for Britain to have a balanced attempt against the Germans. El Alamein, however, is still rightfully scorned, and it's just, the map itself is just a MG42 gunner's wet dream, and it is great for tank combat, but it's just really wide open, and again, a good team with MG42s is going to cut down any attacking force if used correctly. Just compared to the British that, like I mentioned, have the Lewis gun that just cannot stack up against the MG42s. So, again, that's just personal opinion. Driel, I think, is not a bad map. I don't think Tobruk's a bad map. El Alamein not really my favorite. It's definitely probably one of my worst ones that I feel like I have personally. But you can leave your comments down below on that one. But if there was a weak spot, I'd have to say it would be the maps. And I think some people would probably agree with me on that one, even if it's not for the same reasons. Now, I know this is a very long-winded thing about the British faction, and arguably didn't even touch on 100% of the items that could say makes the UK good or bad. There's definitely some aspects like the machine gun, stuff like that, but at the same time, there are a lot of aspects that I think make the British faction good now, and I think a lot of it is iffy. And I had a couple motivations to make this video again with Tobruk, want to do something more British themed. I also run, or at least help run, a league called Hell EU. Yes, funnily enough, an American in a European league. I'm one of the admins, and a big debate we have is with rule sets, and one of which is banning the Panther, which I don't really agree with, because at the same time, no one plays the British faction who has 2 decent heavy tanks. But I digress. But this is something a little different. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave your comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Although I am pretty busy moving forward, I will do what I can to get content out. But thank you. Take care.